This is Guitar Business Radio, the podcast for the business of guitar. No reviews, no demos, no idle chatter, just useful dialogue and information to help you get the most out of your guitar-related business. Whether you're a guitar builder or a guitar player or just something in between, this is for you. Now, here's your host. Oh, wait, it's me, Jeffrey D. Brown. So let's get to it. Well, it's Memorial Day, a national holiday in the United States, and we want to give a big shout out to those who have served their country. But the show goes on, and welcome to episode 16 of GBR. Now, our wraparound is going to be a bit shorter today because we have an amazing and lengthy interview for you with the CEO of Eastwood Guitars, Mike Robinson, who's really blazed a unique trail in the guitar business for like the last 16 years or so. And he continues to pursue some very innovative strategies for his company. They've made a name for themselves building tribute and replica guitars from the 50s and 60s, now even the 70s and 80s. Some of you may remember that many of those instruments had strange shapes and, a million knobs and switches, and of course, generally played pretty terribly. But they've come back to life thanks to Eastwood, and while they still have some of those strange looks, these new versions are built well and play well, and now the company produces, get this, over 250 different models of guitars, including some new and original model lines as well. So we'll be talking to Mike in just a few moments, so stick around for that. I also want to briefly mention that we'll be adding some new properties to our lineup at Guitar Business Media. It's a natural progression, and while I'm not quite ready to give you any details at the moment, it's kind of just a tease. We'll be making some announcements over the coming weeks that we're pretty excited about, so pay attention. In the meantime, if you enjoy and get value from what we're doing, please tell your friends and share our social media posts and help us continue the growth of our audience worldwide. We're very, very pleased with how things are going, and we really appreciate your interest and support. It makes a difference, I'm telling you. We also love to hear from you about the show or anything in the business for that matter, so please stay in touch. Also, after the interview at the back of the show in the value shot today in Next Level Part 7, we're going to be talking about a new aspect in taking your business or career to the next level as we introduce the idea of market messaging. It's short and to the point, and for those of you who've been following that segment, don't forget that specially produced individual segments of the value shot with complete transcripts are all immediately available to those of you who join us on Patreon at the Guitar Business Insider level and above. And now for something of truly epic proportions. This is your source for profoundly interesting news briefs. Guitar Business Radio presents The Shorts. In an earlier episode, I can't remember which one, but I mentioned a unique project that I developed about, 11 years ago. It's called the Guitar Wall. I imagine some, or maybe many of you may remember it. It was very popular for a long time. In fact, we ran it for almost 10 years. But it ultimately became old and unstable in its current form, and we had to put it down. In some ways, you could loosely compare that loss to losing a pet, like a dog or cat or whatever. But life goes on. Oftentimes, down the road, you realize it's time to get a new puppy and start over again. Which kind of reminds me of a movie I watched recently called A Dog's Purpose. Now, if you like dogs, you might really enjoy this. I recommend it. But I think there's some parallel here because recently, after a bit of a hiatus, I decided we should have a new version of the Guitar Wall for modern times. And so we built it, and this new wall is quite different than the old one, and not just in the look and feel, but in the way it's managed. Today, it's more of a curated display of wall spaces, which are basically free for guitar builders and other guitar-related companies in several other categories. There's a visual quality threshold because it is, after all, a visual experience, but it's easy to request a free wall space. As usual, each space links to the Spaceholders website directly. So for visitors, it's an easy way to get some additional information about something they see and are interested in. You know, at one time, the old wall had like about 500 Spaceholders. I mean, it was astronomically big, astronomically speaking. But the new wall, which is still pretty young, currently has about 50 companies participating, but we're slowly getting the word out about it. So if you love guitars, it's worth seeing. If you have guitar-related products, including guitars that have a great visual component, the wall is essentially free advertising. There's no downside. So check it out at theguitarwall.com. Now, for the moment you've been waiting for. Well, Mike Robinson started Eastwood Guitars about 16 years ago out of a passion for those wild and crazy electric guitars from the 50s and 60s. Some of you remember those. But today, the company has grown into a multi-brand organization with over 250 guitar models, all while developing some of the most innovative methods of marketing and manufacturing in the guitar business. And we're going to learn a lot more about all that and much more as Mike Robinson joins us right here and right now. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. It's just great to have you on.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Awesome. Okay, well, listen, like everybody's kind of getting used to, we always start off with some foundational information, and I can tell you, I've been watching Eastwood Guitars for many years, but I think our listeners would enjoy knowing something about the history in terms of your own path up to starting the company and the premises upon which the company was started. So, what can you tell us?
Sure. Well, to try to keep it relatively brief, but the business side of it fully intact, I think we have to go back to 1997, which was a couple of years after eBay first started. At that time, I had, as a hobby, I was collecting weird oddball guitars, and I started up what you would call today a blog, but at the time it was just a website called My Rare Guitars.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was, the funny thing was, it was only 2 years after eBay started, and really the intention of that whole site was just to help me buy, sell, and trade weird guitars, because the more you get, the more you want. But that was not at all my full-time work. I had never been involved in the guitar business whatsoever. I came from the high-tech background, and at the time I was living out in San Jose, and My Rare Guitars was just simply a way to document, write, photograph, and post all of my findings about these crazy guitars. So it was really just, my passion was not the high-tech industry. My passion was guitars. But it was a hobby. It wasn't really an income.
Let me just quick ask you, your passion was guitars. Did that start earlier on with you? I mean, when you were younger? When did that start?
It came out of just a passion for rock and roll. I was one of those kids since I was 10 or 11 years old that spent every penny I had on buying records at the record store.
Okay. And
so I built up a large record collection, and most of it was guitar-based music mostly from England at the time. Because originally I grew up in Canada, but we didn't get out to California until the early 90s because the high-tech industry led me there. But yeah, it was rock and roll. And I started, I just always had this obsession with crazy, weird guitar. And we're talking not Fender, not Gibson, but the crazy, weird things out of Japan that had way too many knobs and too many pickups and tremolos on everything and sparkle finishes. So that was my thing. And when, basically eBay, the internet, the ability to build your own website all kind of came together in the mid-90s and allowed somebody like me to start documenting what I was excited about. Really, that's where it started. How that evolved into Eastwood was quite simply the natural progression of it. Over time, when you have something you're passionate about on the internet, people find you and track down what you're interested in because they have like-minded interests, and they want the same guitars you have. And over time, there's just not enough of them to go around. So I started thinking, well, why not make some replicas of them? And that's what led to starting Eastwood Guitars.
Now, when was that? When did that sort of Eastwood thing bubble up, and when did you actually?
It was 2001.
Okay.
January 2001, I went to my first NAMM show, just out of curiosity to see how does this work? If I want to make guitars, replicas of guitars, obviously they're going to have to be lower cost than buying original guitars, so they're going to have to be made offshore. So I went down to the NAMM show just on a kind of curiosity visit, and that's when I started really thinking about the fact that this could actually become a business. Coincidentally, at the time, I'd gotten out of the high-tech world and was kind of in an in-between stage of my life with what am I going to do next.
Right.
The tech rendezvous I had for 15 years was quite successful. So I had some time to kind of meander around. And so the following year in NAMM, 2002, I went there with the full intention of starting Eastwood Guitars and buying a lot of guitars and starting up a business.
And in 2002, when you went to NAMM, was Eastwood a reality yet, and were you presenting yourself as Eastwood Guitars yet, or not?
Yeah, it's a good question, because back then, most of the manufacturers, they're looking to get more business out of Gibson, Fender, Epiphone, Gretsch, etc., the big name, than some individual wandering around the NAMM show with a 1967 Mosrite guitar asking if you can make some copies of it. they generally just don't want to bother talking with
now,
you.
Now, is that what you were doing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing.
You had the guitar with you, and
I had my guitar with me, and I went booth to booth saying, "Can you make this thing?" And that, they're thinking in big numbers. I didn't know what that number was until we finally got a hold of one manufacturer and who was willing to talk. And basically, it comes down to, if you're willing, and this is back in 2002. Some things have changed, but if you're an individual willing to buy 650 guitars, they'll make pretty much whatever you want them to make. And the reason it's 650 guitars is because that's just about the number that you can stuff into a 20-foot ocean-going container.
Okay, that's good to know.
So that's kind of the opening order, if you will. And that's where it started. I went back to the hotel room that night, put together a purchase order on a piece of paper, and ordered 650 guitars.
And did that come in one container?
Yeah. And, it's maybe a dozen different models with 3 or 4 colors each, so it's not 650 of the same. But the curious thing was, that was January 2002. In June of 2002, we moved back to Ontario. That's another whole story, family-related thing, but we moved back to Ontario, where we'd grown up. And halfway through that month, that 20-foot ocean container backed up the driveway, and all the kids in the neighborhood came by and kind of helped unload it and stuff the guitars into the basement of the house, into the living room, every room. And that's kind of where our first commerce started taking place.
Got it. And so that did the guitars, I'm trying to remember, they said Eastwood on them? Was it an Eastwood? And they were all the Mosrite variations? Yeah,
this was before I knew anything about trademarks. So I had Vox Phantom copies. I had, all my favorite guitars I made. But as soon as you start selling them, you start getting cease and desist letters, and you quickly learn about what you can and can't do. But that was kind of like the first batch of everything. It was summer 2002.
So I assume that, and we can talk about that, but over time that those were issues that you were able to resolve on a regular basis. And you we presume you resolved it at that time, or that it wasn't ultimately a problem for you.
Yeah, no, it's all part. I mean, this is guitar business radio, so there's business stuff we can talk about, and it's the nature of doing business in this world. There's constantly trademark issues that you have to find your way around, and rightly so. So
I would imagine that comes up when people are looking at, well, how does he do all these things? And I've heard people say that every now. Some friends of mine that were close to the business, we've talked about Eastwood from time to time. But I mean, you've been at this now for quite a while. So I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of really how the business has grown now over the years in terms of successes, but also in terms of, some of the lessons that were learned along the way. It's a big question, but I'm going to let you take it, where you want to go.
Well, yeah, in terms of success, I mean, we've grown year over year, except for when the market crashed in 2008, but steady growth. And that's been 16 years now. So And it started in a suburb of Toronto, and now we've grown into multiple cities and multiple countries. But back in 2002, like I said, we started out with maybe 15 models, and now we've got over 250.
Wow.
Wow. And that is, guitars, bass, baritone guitars, tenor guitars, mandolins, a whole family of products with 8 different brands across those product types. So yeah, it's been healthy and fun. In starting, like I said, starting out in Toronto in 2002, we expanded to and all we're trying to do along the way is, as we grow, is to expand and solve problems for customers. So in 2009, we opened up in Liverpool, England, because we needed to solve the problem of the ridiculous expense of shipping one guitar at a time over to Europe.
And that is a problem. It is.
Yeah. And so you get to a point where you're going to take a container of 650 guitars and ship it to Liverpool instead of Toronto. So now you've just replicated what you've done, but now we can ship, FedEx ground pretty much anywhere in Europe for a reasonable rate, and have the full catalog represented there. The next problem we solved, and these are all growth-related things, the next problem we solved is being in Canada, although I love living here, it's difficult when 95% of your North American revenue is in the United States.
Right.
Because then you're throwing, basically UPS is getting rich instead of us. So we thought we have to really open up a main headquarter in the United States. So 2012, we opened up in Chicago. And that's sort of our main distribution hub now for North America.
Okay, so you have a big warehouse there, and
Yeah. Most of the commerce is done online. There's dealers throughout the world that buy. There's customers that buy direct from the Eastwood.com website, EastwoodGuitars.com website. But those orders in North America would be fulfilled out of Chicago predominantly, and anything in Europe would be fulfilled out of Liverpool. And then late last year, we opened up another facility in Nashville, partnering with Dennis Fano and some other to handle some of our new higher end stuff, like the Revolta line and high end Airlines, Backlund guitars, etc. So now there's a second warehouse in Nashville, which ultimately will spawn into a Made in America guitars through Eastwood.
Oh, is that right?
Which is another old story. Yeah.
Is that right? Now, is that, I'll just interject a little bit because that sounds like a bit of news. Is that happening anytime soon, or what's the... I would give it like an 18-month timeline, okay. 18 months, 2 years. The facilities are there, the equipment's there, everything we need to make guitars are there, but for now it's a distribution warehouse for those predominantly models that we've co-developed with Dennis Fano. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that seems, probably a logical way to go. Obviously, that would be a little different price point, presumably.
Yeah, and that's for every one guitar you sell at $4,000, you'll sell 10 at $1,500, and you'll sell 30 at $500.
That's interesting.
And when you've got 250 models, you need to cover all of that whole band. And you need to be able to do it from multiple warehouses so that, all the orders can get fulfilled that way.
Interesting. There's an awful lot there. I mean, we could talk about, some of the models and some of the strategy there. But the thing that I really want to spend some time talking about, because I think you've come up with a very innovative approach to operating a custom shop. In fact, the Eastwood Custom Shop seems to be quite a departure from tradition. So I want to hear about the origins as well as where you are with it right now and then where you hope to be going with it in the future. Really, really interesting stuff. Yeah,
it's I think it's been 3.5 years now. I'm not sure Custom Shop 2 is the proper name for it the more we look at it, but
that's what you're calling it, though.
That's
basically
what we're calling it, EastwoodCustoms.com.
Yeah.
But essentially, it was built to solve a problem with our business model, and that is, the nature of our business is making replicas or tributes to old guitars, which are strange. So the volume of any one of these strange guitars is never going to be anywhere near a Fender Stratocaster.
Sure.
It'll have a finite group of people that find it interesting. Because of that, you end up with 250 different models. Mm-hmm. So back when, 3.5, 4 years ago, we started thinking about how do we solve this problem because the problem is you have to take a risk in saying, okay, are we going to make 100 of this weird thing and hope we sell them? Or are we going to make 20 and regret not making 100?
Yeah.
So
that's a good analysis.
Yeah, that kind of sums up. So we were watching this. Everybody's probably familiar with Kickstarter.
Sure.
So we took that concept. In fact, Kickstarter kept coming to us, asking us to put our products on their platform, which I liked the notion of how it worked. But what I didn't like is Kickstarter is where you bring a barbecue with a Bluetooth radio built into it and see how many people are interested into it.
No,
so there's not.
I could have used that last night when I was barbecuing.
Yeah. But, so basically the audience is not guitar players. And people who go to Kickstarter are people who don't have an audience. We have an audience. We have a worldwide audience.
Sure.
So we thought, why don't we just develop a Kickstarter-like program where we can then, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to risk making 100 of such and such a guitar, I'm just going to post, here's a 1962 blah, blah guitar. We're thinking about doing it. If we can get 24 people to do it at a retail price of $799, then we'll go to production with it. And if those 24 people are willing to put up a $150 deposit to commit to buying it when it's ready 4 months from now, then that'll be the way forward. This way, those 24 people there's no risk in it for them. Because if only 12 people sign up, we give those 12 people their $150 back and say, sorry, this isn't going to fly.
Right.
And there's no risk for us because we don't make it until we've got enough people to make it. The upside for us is if 100 people put in $150, then we know we've got a winner that we can move forward. And that's essentially it. We put the model up there. We give it 3 to 4 weeks. We advertise it in our weekly newsletters saying, hey, here's this new product we've just put up. If you're interested, click here. And here we are 3 years later. We've generally got 4 to 5 projects any given week in the funnel that we're looking for funding for. At the same time, we've got probably a dozen that have been funded and are in production. And I think since its inception, we've successfully funded somewhere north of probably 80 to 100 different models.
That's wild.
Yeah. And the curious thing, of those 80 to 100 different models, maybe 20 of them were home runs, and they become part of our ongoing product catalog. Now,
is there I don't know if you want to say this or not, but is there a threshold, or you have a general rule of thumb that,
I mean, basically it becomes cost effective. If we get 24 people, it's financially viable to do it. We have 24 happy customers that hopefully will become part of the family. It's not hugely profitable for us, but it doesn't lose money. And if you make 50 to 100, then you've got something that goes forward in time. Okay. And it's really kind of it's twofold. It lets the people kind of vote for what's right and what's wrong, or what's a dud or a good.
Well, it's a real market. It's a real market solution.
Yeah.
In that
regard. And it also, of those, 5 or 10 models that we have on the go at any given point in time, or of the 80 that have become successful, 80% of those were ideas from our customers.
Wow.
So people email us all the time saying, and this comes back to the trademark thing, we get emails constantly saying, hey, Mike, I think you should do, why don't you guys do, a 5-string Rickenbacker bass or something like that? Well, right off the bat, we can't do Rickenbacker. That's the end of the story there, because we understand. So, of those 100 requests we get, usually 70 of them get stopped right at the door because there's trademark issues that people don't understand and we do understand. So the 30 that get through, then there's kind of technical, mechanical issues that are too expensive to replicate. Strange, plastic molded pick guards or from the 60s and 50s that just aren't worth doing unless you're going to make 500. So it narrows it down to things that are viable. Those are the ones we put up on Custom Shop and see if they'll fly. So, and it's fun. It's fun for everybody.
And you built, I've looked at the site, and you've built what is functionally a pretty nice site in terms of the way it works. And, it feels like, the rewards are basically you get the guitar,
Yeah.
And
it's we tried to keep it as simple as possible. So people can kind of, if they like it, they're in. If it doesn't fund, they get their money back and we can try again on something else. And it's fun. And, it's human nature that there's always a percentage of people that want to be the early adopters, that want to be the first kid on the block with the guitar. Then there's another wider swath of the population that doesn't want to take the risk. So it's not for them.
Now, I'm curious. I'm sure you got a million anecdotes that you could tell us about different instruments. Is there, one or two stories about these custom guitars that maybe are your favorites, or things that you can recall that had something special about them? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, my favorite one was, I think it was like the second or third one we did, which really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And that was, there was a guitar in 1967 called the LeBay 2x4. And I've been aware of it since day one. The guys at a band named Devo kind of raised the popularity of it back in the 70s. But basically it was a 2x4 with a neck bolted onto it, a couple of humbuckers and a Bigsby. And I'd been, like I said, it's been on my radar since day one, 12 years ago. But I'd always thought, how many of these could we possibly sell? And I always just thought we'd be lucky to sell a dozen or two. So I just always kind of pushed it back. Then when we started Custom Shop Up, I thought, well, this is the time to do it. So we contacted the guys at Devo. Bob One is the name of the guitar player that played it. And we got in touch with him to explain how Custom Shop worked. And he just thought, well, this will be fun. What harm could it do? And I thought, yeah, this will be fun. Well, here's the place to give it a try.
Well, who actually owned? Was there an ownership or a copyright or a trademark or anything with that?
No, and that's the thing. For most of these things, most of the guitars we replicate were popular in the 50s and 60s, and all of those businesses died before the 70s even arrived.
Right.
Most of the trademarks and brands just disappeared because nobody was supporting it.
Right.
So you can pick up these trademarks later in life and assign it as long as you're doing commerce with them. Not that I don't want to get into a whole lesson about trademark, but I've gotten pretty good at understanding how it works. But so the LeBay guitar, we put it up there, and within about 4 or 5 days initially, the sales went up to 30, 40, 50. And I thought, what is going on here? And it turns out, this was kind of one of my early lessons in social media, that the Devo band had somebody that was managing their Facebook page. They had over 600,000 followers, Devo fans. And all they did was they heard about the guitar, so they popped a link up on their Facebook page. And by the time the 3-4 weeks had gone by, we sold somewhere north of 200 of these guitars.
Wow.
Before going to production, before committing any of that. So that's one of my favorite stories, because it shows you how successful the business model is, but also the power of social media and the following that people have.
I want to ask you about something that I just thought about, and I'm a big fan of Robin Ford, and so you probably know where I'm going with this. But I remember back there's some video out, and Revelation was one of my favorite early tunes that he did, and there's some videos of him playing in a spree, and it's been so long that I didn't remember that guitar, and I'm old enough to remember it. But then I recently saw something like that on your site. So what can you tell me about that? How did that come about?
There's a good example of where a Robin Ford fan came to us, had discovered Custom Shop, and said, well, I think this one will fly because there's a lot of Robin Ford fans out there, of whom I wasn't. I now am more familiar with his work. But so we did the same thing there. We put it up on the website, and the tricky parts is there are certain things in certain models you can't exactly replicate. So you generally tend to go for the aesthetic, the look, the feel, to kind of say, well, if you can't afford an original, which is the other problem that this solves, by the way. If you're looking for an original Robin Ford Esprit, they're expensive. So we thought, well, there's probably a price point in the kind of $600 range that we could cater to.
I don't remember what that guitar sold for originally.
Yeah, it probably would have been that much.
Yeah, because that was a long time ago, 1980 or 81.
Yeah, so the retail value of a vintage one is somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000. So like I said earlier, for every person who's willing to spend $3,000, there's probably 10 that'll spend $600. maybe 20 that'll spend 600.
Sure.
The other thing is you can't you can't advertise, hey, we're making a replica of Robin Ford's guitar, because Robin Ford, his name itself is trademarked by virtue of the fact. So, you got to be careful how you market things. But so we I think we finished that one. Actually got released about a month ago.
Oh, is that right? Okay, so
yeah, they're available.
Okay.
You didn't get one.
We might work that out. So very, very, very interesting. I'm sure I'd have a lot of other questions, and maybe at another time we'll follow up on something else. But let's move on to another a topic, because we're talking about innovation and willingness to try new directions. And so I understand that you just got back from Liverpool in the UK, where you guys did a pop-up event of sorts. And I wonder if you can tell us about that. How did that work out, and what did you learn from it? Yeah,
so the Liverpool every year has a music festival. This particular one's called Sound City. It's kind of a miniature version of South by Southwest, which most American audience would know that event. But I'm not sure the numbers, I'm guessing it's probably 100 to 150 bands kind of converge on Liverpool for the weekend and take over every single live stage, bar venue, every venue in the small area called the Baltic Triangle, which is only about 4 square blocks, I'd say.
Okay.
Our office facilities in Liverpool are based in the Baltic Triangle.
Oh, that's cool.
And,
that makes it proximate.
Yeah. We thought, well, if we were ever going to try, experiment with what our own retail operation would look like, here's a place we could do it fairly inexpensively because we don't have to ship guitars anywhere. And we'll have a built-in audience of all of these bands in town.
I would think so.
Yeah. So we
and how many do you have any sense of what the population influx for this event was? Does anybody have a clue?
Let's say there's 150 bands with let's say there's 500 musicians in town. Each one of them will have a small number of their own following and fan base that will come out. So it gets to be a reasonable size. It's good for the economy of Liverpool. I mean, the city of Liverpool itself it's not huge. So what we did was we partnered with the guys that were kind of running the whole show, and they set up a small kind of live studio, because their intention was they want to film every band and do a Facebook real-time live, not every band, but quite a few of the bands. Like they were doing a band would play a song, do an interview, and so every hour the new band was circled through this sort of live small studio. So wow. We built an entire store right next to that studio. So the bands would, so let's say a band slotted to do their gig and their interview at 1 p.m. At 1:45, they'd come through our store, pick up their guitars, walk next door to the venue, sit down, play their gig, do an interview, and then come back and drop the guitars off again.
They were playing with your guitars?
Every band that went through that entire thing, the entire weekend, was using Eastwood guitars.
Wow.
Yeah. So what we got out of that was a ton of Facebook content that can be reused with. I mean, obviously these types of shows, they're not international famous acts. Out of those 150 bands, maybe 10 of them were fairly well known. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the bands would keep their guitar, and we have using our artist program, and they use their guitar in the actual gig they did later that night, which would be at the full venue. So we had people roaming around with video cameras, kind of capturing all the bands playing live. We did a lot of interviews. We did a lot of we just did a whole lot of social media stuff based around that 3-day event. And in hindsight, we wish that the math worked on doing that in every city for every event, but I'm not sure that it does yet. It certainly did it from a branding perspective. I mean, we got a huge amount of mileage out of this from a branding and awareness perspective on the Eastwood brand. So where we're going to take it forward is we're looking at doing an actual kind of pop-up shop roadshow to any major city in Europe and U.S.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, there's kind of two versions of it. One would be pure commerce only, where we just set up and invite guitar players to come because they can't go to a local guitar center and pick up an Eastwood guitar. It just won't happen. We can do that, but we can also do things in association with South by Southwest and other, those types of festivals.
It's in keeping with what you're doing on the custom shop. And when we were talking about this earlier and emailing back and forth, that was one of the first things I thought of, was taking it on the road. And there's not that many companies, I don't know, that would really be able to do that, or that are even positioned to do that. And because you have this tremendous line, just in terms of size and product and stuff like that, it's a very interesting idea, and I know we'd like to keep an eye on that and follow it through. Do you have any sense of where that is on the plane?
Tentatively, we're targeting, because the pop-up shop that we built in Liverpool, we built it in a modular fashion so it can be resurrected elsewhere.
So you have it in a container someplace, and you can
So we can. So what we're now looking at is probably October timeframe, somewhere down in London or Brighton area or somewhere. We just need to find what the location is and what the logistics would be, and then that'll really be just to kind of prove it out on the commerce side. Sure. And if it proves to work financially, like build a business plan around it and see how well it measures up, then we could replicate that in any city in the world. And there's a lot in North America that are on my list.
I would think so. In fact, I would tell you that one of the things that kind of spurred me on that was where you had some pictures posted and about the event. There were some comments down there. Some guy from North Carolina was saying, "Can you bring it out here?"
Yeah, I'm sure everybody in every town would love us to wheel in their 800 guitars.
Just being able to figure out how to do that profitably and sensibly is probably, like you say, you need the business plan. So, gosh, lots of cool stuff. But I want to kind of close the loop a little bit here, and because clearly you've taken many roads that I would say, are unused, untraveled by the traditionalists in the business. I'm not really aware of any other company that's doing exactly what you're doing. I'm aware of a couple of small players, but you're really in a unique space. So I'm kind of imagining that you may also have a little divergent view of the industry as a whole and maybe where we're going. I don't know that for a fact, but if I'm right, or even close to being right, what is it? How would you describe it? What's the picture you have in your head?
That's a good question, because it's something we, as a business and the management team, discuss on a regular basis. We started the business 100% selling direct to end users, just because it seemed to me that was kind of the natural extension of where we started with My Rare Guitars. Over time, you start picking up dealers, not because we went out to seek them out, but the dealers themselves become fans of the product and want it in their shop. One of the when you talk about the industry, the thing that I'm constantly looking at and struggling with and trying to figure out is in North America in particular, there is it's almost kind of a Walmart effect with a company called Guitar Center. And I have nothing against Guitar Center, other than the fact that they are kind of, if you're a manufacturer, they are kind of the only choice in 80% of the cities in North America. Like an example would be the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's probably a dozen Guitar Centers and maybe only one or two small independent stores. Now, so part of this problem for me is from the business side is how do I take 250 different models and ask a small shop in Dallas to properly represent our brand? It's impossible. The same problem is Guitar Center isn't really built to represent our brand. Even if we allowed them to become a dealer of ours, which they've asked us to on many occasions, they would still only represent a small sliver of what we had, and it would take up 0% of the hook space in the store. And if you're not going to put our guitars in the store and you're only going to sell them online through Musician's Friend or Guitar Center online, then why don't we just do that ourselves?
Exactly.
We've always done it ourselves, and we do a pretty good job of it. And we know who the customers are because they're already on part of our ecosystem. So, out of necessity, this is why the pop-up shop is becoming kind of is starting to make sense. Because if I could set that shop up in Dallas, Fort Worth for 1 week, giving people 3 months notice or so that we're going to be there. September, it's like Pink Floyd's coming to town. September 28th, 29th, we will be at such and such a location.
It might have to be a stadium,
Well, at least it gives people a chance to finally pick up and try the guitars, which unfortunately they can't, because there's a good chance in whatever city you live in. I think we probably only have 20 dealers in North America. And of those 20 dealers, probably only 4 or 5 have a pretty good selection of what we have. So the pop-up shop might solve some of that problem. But again, we're just looking at what the lay of the land is. Back to your question really about the industry and how I see it. In my mind, it still struggles from kind of the 1960s, 70s distribution model and method that, since the internet's inception, there's better ways of doing this business. And, obviously we believe we're on the right track. Whether we are or not, I don't know, but we're certainly been doing well.
Well, 16 years down the road, you're still functioning.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other questions you had earlier, which I neglected to answer, was basically, so what lessons have we learned through all of this? And one of the main things that's kind of a culture at Eastwood is that because especially selling direct to end users, we just constantly want to treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself, on every single level. And this is a big thing for us because we're directly connected with the customer. It's not like there's a buffer of a dealer or a distribution network or anything else between us and the customer. We're customer facing all day long. And, I'm not sure if it's the same in California, but when I have a problem with my cable TV company or my internet provider or my cell phone, it is just such a struggle to get that problem solved. And I'm always being upsold into something else. I just want to get the problem solved. And it's almost as though they just don't have any respect for me as the customer and how they want to handle it. So that's one of the big lessons. The other thing is a big one is we invest a lot in technology. So the latest systems, not just to make our job easier, but more so to make the customer experience as smooth and simple as it can be. That was the other kind of one of the other big lessons that we've picked up over the years. Because if you're going to do business online and directly with people, you want it to be simple. Just like whenever you want to buy something anywhere, if it's complicated, you end up not buying it. And all it takes is some investment in the technology. And lastly, the other thing, and this is from the Liverpool trip, just reminded me of this. We also went down to London for 4 days. Travel a lot. It's important to travel and get out there in front of your customers and meet with them, because you find out exactly what the real pulse of the business, of the whole industry. We took a wander down Denmark Street in London, which I've been going there for 20 years. And it's kind of I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's kind of like the central mecca of all guitars in London. And it's gone through some big changes in the last few years. And I would have not have guessed that without physically being there. And, so traveling around a lot, it's worth the expense. So those are the life lessons I've learned.
Yeah, it's great. It's great stuff. And we've learned a lot. I'm absolutely confident that our listeners are going to really enjoy this. Very refreshing, very innovative, creative, and anything that's creative and innovative has my attention. So I'm thrilled to have been able to have you on the show and talk to you. And we managed to go about 42 minutes or so we're right in the sweet spot. And I appreciate you giving the time. And I'm going to look forward to staying in touch and getting some feedback on some of the things that are going on that we've talked about. And again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I look forward to giving an update on the pop-up shop down the road. Hopefully it's positive.
Well, we will too, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it. So again, thanks, Mike, so much.
All right, thanks.
So thanks for continuing on with us here in The Value Shot. This is the next level, part 7. And we've been talking about a set of foundational building blocks that you can use to help propel your business or career to the next level, whatever that means for you. And just a brief overall review We started off the value shot talking about some useful and more general ideas you can use in your everyday activities. We covered things like the 3 C's in marketing and dealing with so-called constructive criticism and managing the peril of the expectation game and a lot more. In episode 10, we kicked off our Next Level series, which continues as we speak. You may remember that I started by describing the importance of the vision, followed next by 3 segments on implementing the vision, under which we've covered 2 major aspects of the process. First, behavioral characteristics, which include attitude, focus, and knowledge. That led us smoothly into the second aspect, which is leveraging knowledge, where we discussed more specifically leveraging the elements of skills, resources, and experience. Today, we're going to add a third aspect under implementing the vision, which I refer to as market messaging. Again, there are literally mountains of information written on this broad subject matter, but as I've said multiple times, I'm giving you what is essentially a deconstructed view of this so you can use the pieces to create your own foundation to build on. So let's dig into market messaging. What is it? Why does it matter? How do you deal with it? Well, first, let me formally define what it is as I see it. Your market messaging is the deliberate, coordinated delivery of clear and memorable information about your business or career that creates a lasting impression and ultimately compels a desired action on the part of your target market, meaning potential customers or influencers. Now let's dissect that a bit. First, there's deliberate, coordinated delivery. And that just refers to reaching the people who are most likely to become customers or influencers for your business or career. And we'll get into more detail on all of that stuff. But what about clear and memorable information about your business or career that creates a lasting impression? Well, simple. People have to remember something positive about you or your business in order for them to be motivated to take some kind of action in your favor, which, of course, is the overarching purpose of the messaging. So some of you might be asking, well, what difference does this make? And I've heard a lot of folks say, hey, nobody knows my business or products better than me, so I just tell it like it is. That ought to be enough, right? Well, unfortunately, most of the time it usually isn't. And here's some reasons why. You may be too close to your business. You may be biased. Well, you probably are biased. You may assume that your potential customers see things the same way you do. And believe me, that's perfectly natural. It just isn't always that helpful to you or your business. And let's be honest, most of the time, the market has a different view, as shocking and frustrating as that may seem to us at times. And if you're not connecting with these folks in a meaningful and memorable way, you're going to lose them. Maybe forever. So you have to make the connection. Sometimes this happens quickly, sometimes it requires a longer-term effort. And either one is okay as long as you're serious about what you're doing and you're in it for the long haul. And for this purpose, I would simply define that connection again as something positive that is remembered about you or your business by a potential customer or someone who can influence the market in your direction. Both are very important. So why does this matter? Well, one answer is that most businesses or careers cannot operate in a vacuum. Some can and do, but most can't and don't. You have to communicate with the people you depend on to propel your business or your career. And while it's possible to be haphazard in your communications, thoughtfulness, in my view, is almost always more desirable. And by the way, I'm for a balanced approach. And it's easy to get out of balance on this stuff. I'm not a big fan of committees most of the time. You get 4 or 5 people around a table and try to communally write some ad copy or a press release or something. You'd think maybe it wouldn't be, but that's a great example of a highly unbalanced approach. Too much diversity of thought can generate a lot of input faster, so you can go nowhere sooner. On the other hand, being overly obsessed about the process can cause you to create narrow expectations, which can lead to disappointment and bad decision-making. So balance is important. And again, we'll get into more of this as we go. Small incremental steps are just fine. Now, what are some of the ways we deal with our market messaging? Well, here's just a few things to think about for the moment. One of the great lessons I learned from the thick of my magazine publisher days was the art of repurposing. Typically, with the magazine at the hub, we would, of course, create all kinds of ancillary activities utilizing the magazine's identity and reach in the market. And often we would create editorial content or marketing materials with the intent of using them in as many of these activities and other vehicles as possible. And so when creating these things, we were always considering how they would be used and might play across the board. What all that did, and still does today, is help instill consistency of messaging across different vehicles and venues and outlets, anywhere the message can be seen. That doesn't mean that there isn't some tweaking done for these different channels. There is, and that's normal. But this is one of the ways we can think outside of the single path we may be often inclined to travel. It helps us to get used to the idea that there are usually many roads that will take you to where you want to go, or someplace better. And anything that helps us open our eyes that much wider is a good thing in my view, which, by the way, is a lot wider than it used to be. And I'm happy to share with you whatever I know. I hope it helps. Let me know if you have any questions. I always look forward to hearing from you. And as usual, stay positive, keep your eye on that destination, and make sure all your options are open on how you're going to get there. And I'll see you on episode 17. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.